Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Keith Klein. I'm your host. Thank you for being at Wisconsin Business Owners. We are really privileged to have a great day in December, to have a great meal in good company with an excellent speaker. And I'm going to introduce our speaker. Yvonne Lumsen Dill, president of Lumsen Dill Communications, LLC. She has years of experience in corporate social responsibility in embattled industries and nonprofit organizations. Her years of experience helped her attain expertise in issues management and strategic implementation. She's worked in environmental policy for the copper mining industry and in alcohol and public health at Miller Brewing. Since leaving corporate America, she was managing director of the Cardinal Stritch University Leadership Center and executive director of the Women's Leadership Institute at Mount Mary College, places where she was responsible for the planning, implementation, and evaluation of the organization's leadership programs and services. Yvonne is a management communication specialist in issues management and stakeholder relations. She's a member of several boards and organizations in the greater Milwaukee area and served as Wisconsin liaison to the partnership between the White House Project and Rutgers University Center for American Women in Politics. She also served as Southeast Wisconsin Regional Director for Lieutenant Governor Barbara Lawton's Wisconsin Women Equal Prosperity Initiative. Yvonne completed legal studies in corporate management at Antioch University School of Law and gained a Master of Science in Management at Cardinal Stritch University. She's a past fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and Brookings Institution. And she participated in summer institutes at Harvard University's Kennedy School and Rutgers University's Eagleton Institute of Politics. Yvonne was named a Woman of Influence in the category of Public Policy by the Milwaukee Business Journal, and she received a certificate in recognition of community service from the United States Congress. Her business focus today is to work with companies and organizations to help them address and build success around their triple bottom line goals, while enhancing and protecting their greatest asset, their people. Yvonne's concentration on leadership, her concentration is on leadership, communication, and professionalism. Please help me welcome Yvonne Lumsen Dill.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Keith. Thank you very much, Keith. Welcome, everybody. So good to see a lot of familiar faces as well as a lot of new faces. Today, I'm going to talk to you about learning humility, understanding humility as an underlying principle of business and servant leadership. And thirdly, I'm going to be exploring the benefits of humility in business. Now, humility doesn't mean squashing who you are. One way to understand the concept of humility is by thinking about this. True humility is not thinking less of yourself. It is thinking of yourself less. Isn't that an interesting concept? Because a lot of people, when you start to talk about humility in the workplace, which is, as we know, dog eat dog, cutthroat, you don't have time to be humble. You've got to be bossy, you've got to have a big ego, and you've got to let people know that you're in charge and you mean business. So what is this thing about humility? A friend of mine, when he heard that I was going to be speaking on the topic of humility, he said, Yvonne, talking about humility, this ought to be interesting. I don't know what that meant. He's been a good friend for a long time. But in talking about humility, let's take a look at the 7 habits of highly effective people as coined by Stephen Covey. Covey's habit number 5 is a critical characteristic of servant leadership. Because what? It conveys the importance of listening. Another strange concept, listening. Covey suggests that we must first seek to understand and then to be understood. And guess what? You have to listen in order to understand. You got 2 ears and 1 mouth, and there's a reason for that. How does Covey's habit number 5 fit into the 10 characteristics of servant leadership? Remember, habit number 5? Seek first to understand? Well, notice the first tenet of servant leadership, listening. If you are always just waiting breathlessly for your turn to talk, you're probably not a very good listener. Half the time you don't even hear what the person is saying because you're thinking about what you're going to say next. Let me share with you a quick experience. Keith talked about my experience in the copper mining industry. So I worked for the copper mining industry. It was the beginning of my management career. And I kind of developed a reputation as an expert witness because I was the environmental policy analyst for this copper mine, which meant I had to go and testify in front of state legislatures, and I testified in front of Congress, especially the Environmental and Science Committee, a number of times. So my reputation, which took years to build, kind of preceded me, and I was recruited from the copper mining industry to the alcohol beverage industry. So I got to this beer company, and the first thing that somebody might do is say, hey, I'm an expert, I was recruited, they got me here because of my reputation. No, 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 no. I went into that environment, and for the first few months that I was at the company, I barely said a word. I went to meetings, I listened, I took notes, I set up appointments with my peers, and even executives higher ranked than myself, to have a conversation with them. Why? Because I wanted to build relationships. I didn't go in there to show off my knowledge from copper mining. What does copper mining have to do with alcohol beverage anyway? I clearly had to learn the alcohol industry. Far different, consumer product versus business to business of copper. And as a result of my attitude and my approach, I got a lot of respect, and I built a lot of relationships and leveraged trust that I could build on later. Never walked around and strutted my stuff because I was an expert witness. How about the second tenet of servant leadership? Empathy. Does that sound familiar to any of you in here? Empathy. Empathy is close to what? How did I start out talking? Empathy is close to humility. 2 strange things to have in the business world. Who cares about what other people are going through and what situations they're facing? I'm here to tell you what to do. No, no, no. Servant leadership emphasizes empathy and listening. Now, humility is a key virtue that causes caring for others. This from Robert Greenleaf, the father of servant leadership. He was the one that said, humility is a key virtue. Again, does that have a place in the business world? Larry Spears, who is also an advocate of servant leadership and a disciple of Robert Greenleaf, said, servant leadership is a philosophy based on empathy rather than power plays. But I've said enough about power plays, right? Ego, bossing people around. Now, straight definition of servant leadership, there you have it. You probably have heard the phrase over and over again, and you're probably wondering, if you don't already know, what place does it have in business? Well, servant leadership is a key element of good management and sound leadership. Putting people first is an element of success for your business. Pat, I know you know that. The kind of business that you are in, you have to put people first. And that applies for all businesses. It doesn't mean that you put yourself last. Some people can't wrap their head around that. It just means that you what? What do we talk about? That you think about yourself less. You're not so always self-absorbed. came straight from Robert Greenleaf's book, The Servant as Leader, way back to the 60s. And we're still struggling with how to implement that. Now remember that without humility, you can't have good leadership. Here are 12 characteristics of humble leaders. We'll just pick a few. A humble leader takes responsibility. A humble leader knows his or her strengths. And a humble leader leads from competence, not position. In the business world, a lot of people walk around, they forget what they don't know and what they do know. And they're all about, hey, I'm vice president, I'm director, I'm a C-suiter. I don't even have to show that I'm competent. I just boss people around. Does not work. It does not go towards success. And let me just say a little about Robert Weidman. Robert Weidman is an expert in project management. And he came up with these 12 characteristics. And think about project management. Why is this so important to have humility in that field? Usually a project manager is somebody that is hired. They're a consultant. They're contracted labor. They're not an employee in the company. So you go in as a project manager and you're hired by the company to help the company increase efficiencies, help them become more productive, more effective, and get more profit. How do you think the employees in the company are going to feel towards you, looking at you as an outsider contractor? You're coming in here to tell me how to do my job? They're not going to listen to you. They're not going to trust you. They're not going to believe you. And for him to be, or her, to be effective in their work, they've got to build relationships. And Waldman was an artist when it came to that. And he figured out that humility took him much further than just walking around saying, hey, I'm the hired gun, do as I say. He also said, Weidman, this is a good one, humility has a role in business. And guess what? It contributes to the bottom line. Humility? Contributing to the bottom line? How so? This now brings me to the triple bottom line. How many of you are familiar with the triple bottom line? You hear it all the time. Triple bottom line, triple bottom line. Well, what is it? It is people, planet, and profit. A lot of companies are guided by this. Some of them very, very intentionally, but a lot of companies are doing this without perhaps even knowing there's such a thing as triple bottom line. People, planet, and profit are the three pillars of sustainability. And today, I'm focusing on people, because people are critical to success. Many companies are focused on the triple bottom line because it's how financial institutions rate the organization's business. We had a conversation on this table during lunch about financial literacy. And you got to be on top of your game, especially if you're in a competitive field. Triple bottom line is important to businesses because a company's rating can do what? Influence their reputation and ultimately affect their profits. These companies listed here enjoy a high TBL rating because they focus on people, planet, and profit. There are many, many other companies, obviously, Fortune 500 and then some. But here are some examples of Fortune 500 companies that we're familiar with. And they're also smaller mom and pop shops, such as the Honest Company. The Honest Company, Jessica Alba's baby products company. Single entrepreneur moving out. She knows she better watch this because of her reputation and how her profit depends on that. Does this seem strange to any of you? Are any of you seeing these positions, these C-suite positions, for the first time? Companies today are hiring chief integrity officers and chief happiness officers. These are real C-suite positions in six-figure incomes. Why would companies be moving in that direction? Why would they focus on this? I believe that it's because there's a recognition that happy people are productive And if your people are productive, they contribute to your profit. For Fortune 500 companies to go that far, and a lot of nonprofits, to have these positions say a lot about the importance of the people in the triple bottom line. Now, who is that? My first lesson in humility was grandma. Grandma, ironically, grandma was a servant. My grandma was a servant, but she was also a leader. So even when I was a little girl, being raised by my grandmother, I recognized she was a servant and a leader, but I had no concept what servant leader was. I barely know that now. I certainly did not know that so many years ago. But guess what? She was a servant and she was a leader, but she was no servant leader. She was no servant leader. See, my grandmother ran the Governor General's household in Jamaica where I grew up. The Governor General in a colony is the highest ranking government officer on that island because he's the Queen's emissary. And my grandmother, with her 8th grade education, 8th grade, rose to a level where she managed all his affairs, all his business. She managed a staff of sometimes from 8 to 10 to 12 people, from gardeners to cooks to washerwomen, whatever. My grandmother was managing these people. And she did this with an iron fist. From her, I learned Jamaican pride. But I didn't discover humility until much later. Arriving from Jamaica and landing in New York City, young girl, wide-eyed. One of my first jobs was working for a supervisor on Wall Street. She had a command and control style, reminiscent of my grandmother. It didn't take me long to realize that command and control does not work well in the work environment. We have to go back. What Dale Carnegie said in his book that was written way back, that an effective leader will ask questions instead of giving direct orders. I was seeing pride and bossiness, knowing that it didn't work well. And I also realized, as we have all heard this adage, pride goes before a fall. And just as pride leads to every other vice, humility leads to every other virtue. It could go a long way in business. You gotta have compassion for people. You gotta have compassion when you're leading and developing people. Now, over the years on Wall Street, I went from clerk, file clerk, to vice president. And this took a while. It didn't happen overnight. But I had to do this without a role model or a mentor because there weren't a lot of women in the copper mining industry when I was there many, many years ago. So I learned how to bloom where I was planted. I was never envious of other people. I was not jealous of other people. I was always so happy to have my job. I would go to work as a file clerk in the cutest little business suits and pumps. You thought I owned the firm, and I'm going in to file papers. But that's the way I grew, by learning and trusting and blooming where I was planted. But here's a valuable lesson that I learned as I went up the corporate ladder. I learned to share and not withhold information, which is also another foreign concept. Why? Because information is power, and people with power don't want to share that. So they withhold information from you, not even allowing you, right, to do the kinds of things that would make you do your job better. So it's important to share information. And here was another foreign concept for me. Allow people to make mistakes. Oh, I picked up on a lot of my grandmother's command and control. And you don't do mistakes, Pat. If I want things to be done right, I'm going to tell you how to do it, and you better do it. Don't ask any questions. Don't ask any questions, not recognizing that you actually learn from your mistakes. Now, Dr. Kenneth Keith, former Greenleaf president, you don't need to know all this, he said the servant leader is a concern with the success of stakeholders. Stakeholders. Now, when you're in a situation as I was, when you're involved in corporate policy, whenever you have something that comes up, you have to think about your stakeholders. There were nights when I would go and I'd have a problem that's facing the company. And I'd be so mad. I'd be punching the wall and telling my husband, I don't know why I got this job. I can't do this job. And my husband said, isn't crisis management in your title? It comes with the territory, honey. You got to figure this out. So we had a situation once when a drunk driving legislation was coming before the company and the industry. And I went to the usual suspects. Your business stakeholders. Government, because they regulate you, investors, business partners, customers, even the employees. And as we were wrestling with this new legislation, I, as a lobbyist, had to come up with a recommendation for the company. And we were working with the producer, which was a beer company, the distributors who got our product out there, beer, and retailers. And I said, somebody's missing. They're not going to listen to us because we're the bad guys. We're the devil. We need someone pure, like motherhood and apple pie. Who did I reach out to? Becky Brown. Becky Brown was president of Mothers Against Drunk Driving. My boss thought I lost my mind. How can you go to somebody that sees us as the nemesis? And I said, I'm a woman. Becky is a woman. We care about society. We care about kids, those of us who have kids. I can resonate with her. I can talk to her. So I reached out to Becky Brown and brought her to the negotiation table. And then I got so excited and so confident, I reached out to law enforcement. I invited the Sheriff's Association to the negotiation table. My boss thought I really lost my mind then. And then I took it one step further because I'm kind of an overachiever, grandma. I said, I need one other person to make this really look good. I reached out to the clergy. I brought in a Presbyterian, a Catholic, a Baptist minister, and they came to the negotiation table and we looked at the legislation that was in front of the legislature. And guess what happened? We came up with a compromise bill that the legislature liked, and the governor signed it into law. Good old Tommy Thompson signed it into law. And we had a victory. And the reason I was successful as the lead, obviously I had a team, didn't do this by myself, but the reason that I was successful is because I went beyond the usual suspects, reaching out to MAD, law enforcement, and the clergy, and said, what do we have in common? Let's establish good relationships. Let's listen. I really had to listen to MAD's position and the law enforcement. What kept them up at night when they were arresting people for drunk driving or underage kids for drinking. And once we established that, we came up with a good compromise that served the public interest. Now, I just gave you two examples. One is MAD, where you work and get along with people. You're smiling, you know where I'm going. Good expert witness, copper mining to alcohol. And then there were times when we just didn't get along. And people were button heads. And why? Because there was no humility. There was no listening. There was no respect for somebody else's opinion or position. I work for a small nonprofit organization. And we had spent 3 days. That's a long time to be on a retreat, a strategic planning retreat. And we spent 3 days and we came back with a strategic plan in hand. And something went down. And we were not getting along. We were not playing well in the sandbox. And it was because no humility, no listening, no respect. So after coming back from the 3-day retreat, the strategic plan was torn up and tossed away. Everybody was in panic stage. It got so bad that several board members resigned. Board members, a nonprofit organization, valuable assets, right? I left for greener pastures. I was the executive director. I went, enough of this. I'm out of here. And a vice president was fired after I left. So 3 terrible things happened. The board members who quit, look at the valuable resources they took with them. They took important relationships that they had in the community as well as in business. They also took expertise and experience that they had. And what was the third thing they took? Money. They took all their funding with them. So this nonprofit organization had to start again from square one, hiring a new executive director. You know, people in here who are people management people. You know what it costs to replace somebody at an executive director level, all of the recruiting, interviewing, what have you. And then having to replace the vice president and then having to replace the board members. So as a result of butting heads, it costs the organization in time, talent, and treasure because we didn't listen. No humility. Now, these lessons that I just shared with you, they taught me how to sink or swim in a career trajectory in an environment that was truly testing for me. First I was with the copper guys, and then I was with the beer guys. Not a lot of role models at times, but I learned how to sink or swim. And I learned that servant leaders help develop leadership in others, ensuring that they grow and become better as a result. That's what a servant leader does. If you ever think about what the heck is servant leadership and why do I need to care? The test for a servant leader is, while you are supervising people and mentoring people, do they grow as people? And do they become more confident and self-assured? Because you're supposed to be developing the next tier of leadership. And if you're selfish and egotistical and none of that is happening, you're probably not a good servant leader. I learned to become versed in change management. That situation that happened, those 3 tests that I share, those all involved change management and how I had to be flexible and humble to deal with those things. It also taught me talent management. It also showed me that I could take my personal values and my moral compass to inform my decision making and my management style, which I employed all the way from Wall Street to Main Street in Milwaukee. What I've just shared with you is just the tip of the iceberg. The tip of the iceberg. The career that I've had over so many years, I couldn't capture in this short time. But it's my servant leader journey, and I'm still on it. It isn't either or, I learned, because balance is the key. And what helps you in those day-to-day challenges that you have is to keep your eye on the prize. You know, like when I used to go home and tell my husband, I'm sick of this, blah, 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 and he says, crisis management is what you do, blah, blah, blah. Keep your eye on the prize. What are you here to do in life? What are you here? What kind of difference are you here to make? And if you keep your eye on that ultimate prize or calling, you can get beyond the bullying in the workplace. Bullying. You can get ahead of all the other distractions. But none of this is going to be doable unless you start with self. In order for you to be of service to others and to serve others well, you really got to start with self. And you got to examine who you are, where you are. And then recognizing, like keeping your eyes on the prize, recognizing that the work, this took me a while to get. That's why getting older helps. The work is bigger than we are. When we're young and we're starting out, we're so self-possessed. We're so self-absorbed that we can't even see that the work, the goal, the job is bigger than we are. When I was in copper mining and beer, I never sold anything. I was not in purchasing and I was not in sales. My job was CSR, corporate social responsibility. And I saw that as big. I was serious about it. My friends made fun of me hanging out with copper guys and touring mines thousands of feet below the surface of the earth and hanging out, drinking beer at bars. That was what I did. No. Corporate social responsibility was my job, and I was so proud. Another time when we're having beer together, I will share some of my stories with Larry Bird. I'm name dropping, just in case you don't know. My stories with Larry Bird, Rusty Wallace, the dragster Don Prudhomme, and Bobby Rahal. I have stories because I work for a brand. And when you work for a brand, you have to entertain your sports marketing guys. And I have stories. That's not the purpose today. I just want to leave you with my message that I stumbled into eventually, recognizing that true humility is not thinking less of myself took me years, maybe 20, maybe 30, is thinking of myself less. So today, this is the work that I'm doing. I'm talking to companies and organizations on what makes them tick and what makes their businesses successful. And I'm having a ball with it. I'm calling companies and getting in to see the CEOs, and surprised that the CEOs want to talk to me. Is your company in triple bottom line synergy? Call me to discuss the policies and systems that you need to ensure success. I will help you meet your triple bottom line goals. My information is on the table, and it's also here. I appreciate this, the opportunity to share my passion with you and to let you know what drives me. And I would love to work with you on some of these issues, management items, as well as stakeholder relationship building, my passion.